Michael Coleman clutched his portfolio with sweaty palms as he stepped into Meridian Enterprises' gleaming headquarters. 5 years since Sarah's death, and today's interview might finally pull him and 8-year-old Emma out of their financial tailspin. He straightened his second-hand tie, the only one that didn't remind him too much of his wife's funeral, and followed the receptionist down a hallway of success he could barely imagine joining. "Ms. Reynolds will see you now," the receptionist announced, opening double oak doors to an office that screamed power and privilege. Michael stepped forward, rehearsed introduction dying on his lips when his eyes locked onto a framed photograph on the wall behind the CEO's desk. Sarah's smile. Her eyes. The dimple on her left cheek that Emma had inherited. The portfolio slipped from Michael's fingers, papers scattering across imported marble. His legs threatened to buckle as the world compressed to that single image, his wife, vibrant and alive, standing beside the stern-faced woman now rising from behind the desk. "Mr. Coleman? Are you all right?" Michael couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. He simply pointed at the photograph, hand trembling. "My wife," he finally managed. "That's my wife." Catherine Reynolds, the formidable CEO known throughout the industry for her uncompromising standards, followed his gaze to the photograph. For the first time in her 15-year tenure, employees would later whisper, Catherine Reynolds looked genuinely shocked. "Sarah Coleman was your wife?" Her voice carried an emotion Michael couldn't place. "She was Sarah Winters when I knew her. 3 years earlier, Catherine had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of lymphoma. The doctors had given her 6 months. Experimental treatment at Northside Medical Center had been her last resort, where Sarah, before the car accident that took her life, had been the research coordinator who fought tirelessly to get Catherine into the trial that ultimately saved her. She never told me who her patients were," Michael said softly, gathering his scattered papers. "Confidentiality was sacred to her." Catherine nodded, eyes never leaving the photograph. "She called me every single day during my recovery. Not because it was her job, because that's who she was." She turned to Michael, professional veneer momentarily stripped away. "I never got to thank her properly. The foundation I established in her memory funds research, but it never felt personal enough." Emma had been just 3 when they lost Sarah. Michael had been drowning ever since, in grief, in medical bills, in the impossible task of being both parents to a little girl who asked questions about her mother that broke his heart anew each time. "The position you're interviewing for," Catherine said, her voice taking on new purpose. "Tell me about your qualifications again." For the next hour, they spoke about the marketing director role Michael had applied for, a position he was qualified for but would never have been considered for under normal circumstances. Catherine's questions were pointed, professional, but something had shifted in the atmosphere. "Mr. Coleman, I'll be direct. Your experience is somewhat limited for this particular role." Michael's heart sank. Of course. The cosmic coincidence wasn't enough to overcome reality. "However," Catherine continued, "we have another position opening in our communications department that would be an excellent match for your skills. It offers flexible hours and the possibility of partial remote work. I understand you're raising your daughter alone?" Michael nodded, throat tight. "Emma. She's 8 now. Sarah showed me pictures," Catherine said quietly. "She talked about you both constantly during my treatments. Said her family was her anchor." 2 weeks later, Michael started at Meridian. The salary doubled what he'd been making at his previous job. The flexible schedule meant he could be there when Emma got home from school. And every day, he passed Sarah's photograph in the main lobby, where Catherine had moved it from her private office. 6 months into his new position, Michael found himself in Catherine's office for a quarterly review. "There's something I've been wanting to show you," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. Inside was a letter, written in Sarah's familiar handwriting, that Catherine had kept all these years. "Your treatment is working," Sarah had written. "Soon you'll go back to your life, and I hope you remember that the time we have is precious. I look at my husband and daughter every night and think there's nothing more important than loving fiercely while we can." Michael's vision blurred with tears. Here was his wife's voice, preserved in words he'd never read, still teaching the lesson she'd lived by. On Emma's 9th birthday, Catherine attended the small celebration. She brought stories about Sarah that Michael had never heard, about how his wife had fought the hospital administration to get treatments approved, how she'd spent her lunch break sitting with patients who had no visitors. "Your mom was a hero," Emma's best friend whispered loudly. "Like in the movies." Emma nodded solemnly. "I know. Dad tells me stories every night." As guests departed, Catherine lingered. "I've been thinking," she said carefully. "The foundation is establishing a scholarship program for children who've lost parents in medical service. Emma would be our first recipient. Full college tuition, when the time comes." Michael started to protest, but Catherine raised her hand. "This isn't charity, Michael. This is a debt being repaid. Sarah saved my life, let me help secure her daughter's future." That night, after Emma had fallen asleep surrounded by new books and art supplies, Michael sat on his porch looking at stars. For the first time since Sarah's death, the weight of solitary parenthood felt marginally lighter. "You're still looking out for us, aren't you?" he whispered to the night sky. The universe didn't answer, but Michael thought of the impossible coincidence that had led him to Catherine's office that day. Some might call it luck or fate or divine intervention. But Michael preferred to think it was just Sarah, still finding ways to take care of her family, even now. 3 years later, Emma stood proudly beside Michael at the dedication of Meridian's new research wing, the Sarah Coleman Center for Medical Innovation. Catherine had expanded the foundation's work exponentially, channeling millions into the causes Sarah had championed. "Dad," Emma whispered as Catherine delivered her speech, "do you think Mom knows?" Michael squeezed his daughter's hand. "I think she orchestrated the whole thing." Emma smiled, the dimple in her cheek, Sarah's dimple, deepening. "That sounds like her." Michael had learned that grief doesn't end, but it changes shape. The jagged edges that had once threatened to tear him apart had smoothed into something he could carry. And sometimes, in moments like this, with Emma's hand in his and Sarah's legacy expanding beyond anything they could have imagined, he felt something that had been absent for too long: hope.